eBay Motors and ADVRider.com welcome you to episode 55 of the Lowdown show. I'm Neil Graham. JT Nesbitt is a one-off. He designed a Confederate motorcycle or two and is currently deep at work on his magnum opus. And no, he's not writing the great American novel. Rather, he's making the great American motorcycle, the Magnolia 4, from a studio in the city that brought us Professor Longhair. Of course, I'm speaking about New Orleans. In this episode, JT and I talk Gen Zs, the missteps of the Harley-Davidson motorcycle company, the bizarre nature of criticism, and JT ridicules me for expressing feelings towards the Honda Goldwing. But before we take the leap, a word from our sponsor. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay, because you know, whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems. Whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit. Every time. eBay. Things people love. All right, JT. Everybody's grumpy these days. And I was telling you a few minutes ago that we have some listeners, just a few, who listen to this podcast. Actually, they do listen. They would deny it. But they do listen, but they only listen to complain. And they're mad that a podcast is a podcast. And as I said to you, it's like being mad at an orange that it's not a banana. Or what else can we say? Mad at a Harley that it's not a Confederate, or vice versa. Confederate, the motorcycle you designed, of course. You've got some thoughts on this.
My training is as a fine arts major, and part of that training means critique, and that's where you go in front of an entire class, you present your work, and then the teacher and all the students are allowed to go nuts on you, point out everything that's bad and that they hate. That training is so good. It hardens you to be able to pick out opinions that matter, right? So when the professor says something, that matters more than one of your fellow students. But being a guy who's built a lot of strange motorcycles that have, to say the least, challenged people's notions about what an American motorcycle should be, man, I've been drinking this haterade for the past 20 years. Like, you got to have a thick skin to put yourself out there the way that I do. And one of the things that I've always said to people when these kinds of things come up, and it's rarely to your face, but once in a while you get somebody who's brave enough to actually step to you like a man. Just say, well, where's yours? So anybody who critiques your work, okay, well, where's your work? It's your turn to be critiqued.
I agree with that. And I know when I was younger, I was, very vocal in my opinions. As a Canadian, people are always going on, for instance, about the band Rush. And I can't stand Rush. But I would be very vocal about it. And yet, over the years, I've realized that, Rush played 1 million gigs. They fought their way up. They played every little shitty high school and bar and college all over the place, and they paid their dues. And whether I like it or not doesn't matter, because I'm just one opinion. And yet we don't think that way. We think that our way is the right way. It's like the man that gets up every morning and throws up for half an hour every day of his life. He just thinks that's normal. And that everyone else should, does the same thing. And he's shocked when he understands that people don't do that. So it's really hard for us to understand anyone else's experience. And further to your point about criticism, I have another life where I make documentary films, and my partner and I were showing a film to it. We did a test screening. We only did it once. And the trouble is when you ask people their opinions, they give you their opinions. And yet often they're just so bizarre. Like, we showed a rough cut of a film, and somebody came in and said, one of the people at our screenings, and said, well, that guy in the background looks really interesting. Can you make a film about him? Which has nothing to do with what we're doing. I'm sure you get the same thing, right? I mean, what are some of
I made
the
a film. It's called Salt Dreams. It's terrible. It's about my building a race car out of a flooded Katrina car and going to the Bonneville Salt Flats and land speed racing. And is it a lackluster film? Well, sure. But how good is your race car?
Here's something I've been thinking about lately. If you and I love making analogies with things outside of motorcycling, because I think it allows us to frame our conversation a little bit more easily. I don't mean just this conversation, but our conversation in general about motorcycles. So and I wrote this in my notes too. If you think of the legacy guitar makers, Fender and Gibson, most people know those brands. Pretty much every guitar they make is a visual representation of something that was made in the 50s or 60s. Les Pauls and Telecasters and Stratocasters. And it's they're perpetually looking back. And of course, guitarists will pay, outrageous sums of money for a 58, Telecaster or something. It is as if modernity never happened. And I think this is sort of a malaise that's happening with the American motorcycle right now with Indian and Harley-Davidson, is that they seem confused as to where the future is. And it seems like to me that people are a little bit tired of everything looking like a panhead, and they don't really know what to do. And what's your thought? This is the sort of stuff that you think about, and you are a designer and you are an American. So what are your thoughts on that?
Can you hear that?
Yeah, just keep going. It's fine.
All right.
As long as it's not coming from you, then I would say talk to your physician.
Well, let me talk about Harley just for a minute. And look, I don't claim to be a businessman. I don't claim to be a motorcycle industry analyst. Like, take everything I'm about to say as just a guy in a garage in New Orleans who has a lot of experience with motorcycles. Harley isn't on life support right now. They're a corpse. So, and look, I feel bad for them, man. Look, I love Harley. My daily is a 1977 Harley-Davidson FLH in vivid brown. I ride a shovel head all the time.
Isn't that also called dog shit brown?
Well, that's how you know it's original paint, because nobody in the history of ever disassembled a Harley and then painted it brown and put it back together. It's an all original motorcycle. The engine's never been cracked open, and it runs great. I love the bike. It's one of my favorite motorcycles that I've ever owned. Not because it's a good motorcycle, but because I've been able to make a connection with it. There's something about that shovel head that it connects with me. And if you've never ridden a shovel head with the Comfort Flex saddle, the sprung seat, not just the sprung seat, but the one with the scissor linkage.
All right.
You need to do yourself a favor, educate yourself, ride one of those motorcycles. They're fucking fantastic. I love them. But to the point. So now Harley, thanks to Bikers for Trump, is toxic to the left wing, and thanks to overseas source parts and outsourcing of jobs and so-called DEI, they're woke and toxic to the right. Like, where do they go? Look, man, there's one thing that I know that's a fact, and that is that Harley-Davidson is a two motorcycle company. They only make two. They only ever have. The Sportster, which is the loss leader to get people involved in the brand, and then the FLH, the touring motorcycle. Harley-Davidson is a niche manufacturer, period, end of story. And anytime they've ever tried to do anything else, it fails. I'm not just talking about Livewire and in the past 10 years, I mean historically. They've never been anything other than a touring motorcycle company. That's it. Now, history does repeat itself. And in 1969, when AMF bought Harley-Davidson, their goal was to up production. They tripled production. Harley-Davidson was this little family, privately owned niche company that made these kind of niche touring motorcycles and other little stuff on the side, but that's the core of their business. And then they were forced to grow, and their quality suffered. Now, we're in a different age where you can scale manufacturing a lot faster and maintain quality because of the proliferation of CAD software and FEA. So now you can actually take that AMF model and make it work because our tooling is so much more advanced. Nevertheless, the question is, what do you do next, right? So we're in a period right now where we're in the hangover phase from the late 90s and early 2000s, when Harley-Davidson grew like crazy. Everybody wanted one. Lots of people bought them. Harley-Davidson isn't competing with Triumph and Yamaha and Indian and Honda. Harley-Davidson is competing with Facebook Marketplace. I can go on Facebook Marketplace right now and for $5,000 buy a great American touring motorcycle. The market is flooded. That's what people don't understand, is that in this business, man, you're not just competing against other manufacturers. You're competing against the bikes that everybody made 10 years ago. And Harley has tons of bikes out there for sale right now. Make a case for buying a brand new Harley for $25,000. If Harley-Davidson is truly the blue collar motorcycle company, which is what all of their marketing is geared towards, or at least it used to be, make a case for me that my blue collar guy, my plumber, my electrician, my roofer is going to save up his money and spend $25,000, half of his yearly income on a new bike, versus the $8,000 Facebook Marketplace dresser.
The Lowdown Show is presented by adbrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. If you were a designer at Harley-Davidson, what would you do? What would interest you? Would it be refining what they have? Would it be trying something new?
Again, I'm not a businessman. I don't run companies, right? But I have read a couple of books. And there's a great book by Bob Lutz, the former GM for Chrysler. You know the name, Bob Lutz. He wrote a great book called The Bean Counters versus the Car Guys. And one of the overarching salient points of the book was that your CEO needs to come from the shop floor. He's the guy who started out at the company at 15 years old, part-time, after school, sweeping the floors. That's how it works. It's grassroots people who run companies who are connected with the culture. Not just the company, not just the insular culture, but the culture around the product out in the real world. Can you say that about the CEO for Harley-Davidson now?
No, you can't. But you know who you can say that about is Claudio Domenicali with Ducati. He started off there as an engineer. He went to the University of Bologna, hometown boy. And then started off as an engineer, worked on the Super Mono, delightful single-cylinder Ducati. They only made. Well,
again, now we're like, I'm like critiquing things that I can't possibly know. But your original question was, what would you do if you were in charge of Harley? Here's my answer. I would return Harley to a very small niche company that builds American touring motorcycles. I would also dabble with EV under the Harley-Davidson brand, and I would build an electric touring motorcycle. One of the great things about touring bikes is that there's no real penalty for weight, right? So you could have an 800-pound touring bike that fits with the rest of the lineup, but now it's EV and you got tons of range. You could make that bike be a touring bike. And I would call it the Silent Gray Fellow. Like, duh. But again, I'm just a guy in a garage, and I could come up with something. At least it's something.
It sounds like a Graham Greene novel, but it was the name of an early Harley-Davidson, was it not?
Well, of course, that's their first bike. That's what the nickname for her very first Harley was, the Silent Gray Fellow. So it's an EV touring motorcycle is within their core of their product, and you can make a connection sort of with the early days, with their history. Look, man, Livewire is a loser. We all know it. It's dead. Harley-Davidson is $1 billion in debt.
Yeah.
I mean, their stock prices have crashed. Again, history repeats itself. It's 1969, and all over again. But what they need to do is the other way. They need to go take it small. Instead of trying to take it big, take it small.
Let's take a short break for a few words from our sponsor. Picture this. You're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing farther than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what? I could probably also use some new brakes, maybe a shock. This baby, it deserves a new air filter. So you head straight back to eBay. You can find anything you need there. It's unreal. From headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've had in your mind. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay guaranteed fit, because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods. Well, they're always intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and that is, of course, riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back in the road, and you've got eBay guaranteed fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see that green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. Well, now that you know all of this, just imagine standing at that open garage door, looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Now back to my conversation with JT Nesbitt. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. You made an interesting Facebook post a while ago, and it relates to that motorcycle that's just over your right shoulder. Can you summarize what you wrote in that Facebook post, please?
So all of your listeners, I would say the vast majority of your listeners and you are in a bubble. I want to tell you about my town. Where I live is a place called New Orleans. And this is not a motorcycle town. This is much more like the real world. The vast majority of people who live here are service industry. People are poor. They don't have discretionary income. It's very dangerous here to ride a motorcycle with drunk drivers and just the road conditions. I mean, you can kill yourself just going down the street, hit a pothole, bang, you're dead. This town was laid out in the 1860s, so there are no garages. So I say that to preface what I'm about to say. I parked this motorcycle at French Quarter Fest. It's in the French Quarter. And 1,000 people walked by this 1962 last year Triumph Bonneville. Last year pre-unit Triumph Bonneville. Not one person even gave it a passing look. That motorcycle is all original. That's the original seat. That's the original wheels, the original fork gaiters. It has 3,000 miles on it. It's a one of one owner, family owned motorcycle with full documentation. 1,000 people walk by that wonderful object and not one person even looked at it. What does that tell you? What does that tell you about people's interest in motorcycles? Now that's a good cross section, and that's a great cross section of people, right? That's not in the ADV rider bubble. That's at a festival in a town that's not known as a motorcycle town. These are great cross section of incomes, great cross section of races, of identities. And this is kind of general public. It's a great case study for what are people interested in motorcycles. The answer is no.
And were you making the point that they just weren't interested in something old and unusual, or that they weren't interested in the motorcycle as a vehicle at all?
They aren't interested in them at all.
Yeah. See, because one of the things that I thought when I saw that post of yours, and I've wondered this about motorcycles in general, especially retro style motorcycles, because it's so much a part of the motorcycling culture. I mean, you can't go. Well, I guess you can. I guess you can buy a faux 70s Challenger from Chrysler. But the Triumph with their Bonneville range, and so many brands make Ducati Scramblers. They look old. So my thought was, if all motorcycles were modern looking, and there weren't these retro brands, or there weren't retro motorcycles, would a bike like that just stand out that much more?
No, man, your nose is too close to the chalkboard on this one. Dude, when you step back and look at whether people are interested in motorcycles, period, the answer is no. Not the way it looks. I mean, just the thing.
And so why do you think this is, though? Because I mean, and I'll preface this with a couple of comments, but when I was 14 or 15, there was a guy at the end of my street had a Norton Commando, and every time he went by the house, you know how in cartoons when a character starts off, they leave this sort of trail behind them. There's a whip when the coyote would chase the roadrunner. And this guy rode like that, and he was all like, and he was going like he had a date with the devil. He was always rushing. His hair was whipping back. And I thought, and he was probably 21 or 22. And I thought, man, I want to be that guy, because he had autonomy. He wasn't under the thumb of his mother when he was on his Commando, unlike me at home on my bicycle. So does that no longer even exist as an idea? Is that dead?
I think you're probably onto something, and that is what are the aspirations of millennials and Gen Z? Your average millennial and Gen Z, what do they want? And from what I can tell, what they really want is they want to go camping. Their fantasy is to go camping, like to unplug from culture and leave it all behind. Lee Kahn, who founded Modus Motorcycles. Remember Modus? I do, yeah. Yeah, Modus Motorcycles went out of business in 2018 after making 100 units. And I would argue that they were building the wrong bike. But Lee Kahn now builds off-road RVs. You know the ones like the Overlander.
Oh, yeah. The cult of overlanding, yeah.
He can't make them fast enough.
But that's kind of a fantasy, though, isn't it? That's sort of a fantasy, too. I see where I live north of Toronto. I mean, there's always these overlanding vehicles, and they're just going to provincial parks. I mean, it's essentially just glorified car camping. But it looks better on Instagram.
I mean, what's a Harley dresser? The Harley dresser is what's that fantasy? That fantasy is one that I love. That's my fantasy, is to go see the great American landscape, both out there and in my own mind, and I want to do it on an American motorcycle. What a compelling fantasy that is. I love that.
I think that fantasy is dying, though. I think that
Yeah,
you know,
because you get wet. Because when it rains, you get wet. It's like uncomfortable, and you can't just pull the plug anytime you want. And it's cold, and it's hot, and it's noisy, and you got to put earplugs in, and you got to wear all this uncomfortable clothing. Whereas a camper, in one of them RV things, you put on flip flops and gym shorts.
motorcycling is a pain in the ass. I always thought the ultimate American motorcycle, in some ways, was the Honda Goldwing. Because if you think of the ultimate American car, what is it? It's a Lincoln or a Cadillac. For me, it's post fins, so 60s Cadillacs, and of course the wonderful Lincoln with the suicide doors.
Oh man, come on, look.
Elwood angle, and I think of that as the ultimate American car.
No, man, you don't go to see America on a Honda.
But the Honda's a Lincoln. It's a Lincoln Continental. It's a Cadillac.
Have you ever ridden a Harley dresser for any distance?
Oh yeah, I have.
They're fantastic. They do that job. Well, Neil, when I drive on interstate, and I eventually do see motorcycles, coming the other way, 99% of those motorcycles are Harley-Davidson dressers. Dude, they let's not take anything away from what Harley does well, and that's build V-twin air-cooled, highway-ready motorcycles. They do a great job at that.
You've been thinking about millennials and Gen Zs and weigh in.
Well, everybody has an opinion, right? And what I've noticed is that a lot of the opinions out there are that the bikes are too expensive. And I think that might be partly true. But there's another couple of statistics I'd like to throw at you. Gen Z and millennials, 79% of them don't own tools, hand tools, socket wrench set, screwdriver set, etc. The vast majority of them live in apartments and rentals, and that means no garages. And they work in the service industry by and large. So that means, how can you have a motorcycle if you don't have a garage? Realistically, to own a bike, you got to be able to garage it. Otherwise, they turn into a giant pile of shit in less than a year parked outside, especially down here where it rains like crazy and it's hot and humid. The good news is that they're not having kids, right? Which is another big barrier to motorcycle ownership. I'm going to tell you a story about a Gen Z guy that I know. He's 26 years old, and this guy just inherited from his beloved grandfather his grandfather's Harley-Davidson Sportster. Like, how awesome would that be for you or me to inherit like your granddad's? He left it to you in the will, right? That's like a fantasy that I'll never be able to have. Yeah. I want to do that for my niece and nephew, leave them, oh, this is Uncle JT's bike. Wow, man, how special. So anyway, this kid inherits this Harley Sportster from his grandfather and parked it in the garage. And I said, well, what are you doing? Well, come on, let's get it fixed up. Oh, no, I don't want to, I'm not interested in that thing. I'm not interested in riding it. So, well, what? Are you kidding me, man? Are you out of your mind? You just inherited a bike from your grandfather? It's awesome, and it's cool, it's a Harley. He said he rode it once in the yard, dropped it, and then picked it up and put it in the garage, has no interest in riding it ever again. What does that say about his attitude towards risk?
I'm amazed at how the technology has changed with motorcycles. And I don't mean the technology in the motorcycles, but the technology of our culture. And I'll give you an example. A town I grew up in, there was a guy 40 miles away, Charlie Mahoney, very well-known Indian motorcycle expert. And, pre-internet, you never saw one of those things. You didn't know what it was. And then, to see an Indian, you'd have to drive to his shop. He's a lovely old guy and always had a fire on and, would welcome you in. And he had 1916 Power Plus and some everything, and a couple of 4 cylinders and, a Chief or two. And it was just such a wonderful thing to do. And there was such a sensory overload because it smelled of oil and, like proper shop smells and, metal cuttings and cool tool and all these great smells. And there was really, unless I guess you could order a book from, Motor Books International or something if you wanted to, but you didn't have access to anything like that. So to see a Vincent or an Indian or something like that in the wild was just such a crazy ass thing to do. And of course, now what happens is, you see something or you hear of something and then you go home and you type it in and, and it's just all there. And I really love the fact that to see one of those Indians, I had to physically take myself there. And that not having access was a beautiful form of deprivation. And then that deprivation could be, you could fulfill yourself by physically going somewhere to see something. I miss that.
Well, we still have places like that. They're called museums.
True, but if for instance, if you want to see Picasso's Guernica, well, you just Google it and there it is. And now I know it's not the same, but still, you can learn something about it. Whereas before, it was just harder to find stuff, and so the actual tactile, physical, being in the presence of something, I think had a much more visceral response. That we would have a much more visceral response to it.
I mean, I don't know what to say to that except that I'm with you, man. But on the good news, let me flip that around on you, man. If you're a young person and you buy a motorcycle, and there's something that needs to get fixed on that motorcycle, you can YouTube it, and there'll be instructional videos on, well, how do I change a fork seal? Well, here you go. Here's how you change it. The problem is that they're not, they don't own the tools and they don't have the garages to be able to execute on all of that amazing knowledge. Like working on bikes the way that I came up was a pain in the ass. I had to read the manual, which meant that I had to read the service manual and know everything all at once, right? I had to go through and read the whole thing. Now you can pick up little bits of information, how to change a fork seal, execute that one job, and then stand back and say, well, I learned how to do that. Real easy. Now I have more confidence than ever that I could service and maintain my own machine.
YouTube is it really is utterly fabulous for that. I mean, so much of the internet could just disappear and I'd be totally fine with it, but YouTube, and not only that, but just for chasing up, if you remember a scene in a Peck and Paw film and you think, what was Dylan in? Was Dylan in that movie? And then you just track it down and there it is. And I mean, that's beautiful. But yeah, but for fixing stuff, I mean, I've fixed so many things that I never would have thought possible. And of course you can get, I've done brickwork on the house and things like that, thought stuff I was never trained to do, but YouTube can make it happen.
My sister is a high school science teacher. And one of the things that she is really worried about right now is the kids' ability to use their hands. Nobody's teaching kids how to use these anymore. And like when she has a project, she says, okay, well, you pour this into here and then you take this and move it over here. They can't even do that. Like they can't do the simplest tasks that require any motor skills.
Really?
Really, that's what's coming up. That's what scares her more than anything else. And she's real cool, man. She's like, look, if my son wants to go ride motorcycles, great. At least he's not on his fucking phone. Go ride a bike. You want to go shoot guns with Uncle JT? Go for it. At least you're not playing video games. I mean, it's but the kids don't want to do that anymore because they're so addicted to living in their own heads.
When guns are safer than going online. My God, there's a topic for another day.
Well, we're from very different cultures when it comes to that.
We certainly are. You know, we don't have gun culture here in the way that you guys do.
I got my first gun on my 6th birthday. I've been a gun owner since I was 6.
So what would your estimate be in terms of the citizens of New Orleans? How many percentage-wise would you think have guns?
At least 50%.
Yeah.
Look, having a firearm here in the city it's a tool. It's something that everybody needs. It's like a necessary thing that you pretty much have to have. The bargain that you make when you move to New Orleans is that you trade your security for your freedom. So you can do anything that you want to do here in New Orleans and nobody will tell you anything else. Like I can walk down the street in an 18th century ball gown with a cocktail in one hand and a pistol on my hip. Where else in the world can you do that? Nowhere. But you're in charge of your own security. That's the deal that you have to make. It's a deal I'm willing to take. I've been in a gunfight.
Wow.
I've been shot at and I've shot back.
Well, that will make owners of the Magnolia 4 think twice if they want to make a warranty claim, won't they?
Well, no, it's not about violence. It's just the way it is, man. Look, New Orleans, this is 300 years of violence and chaos. There's nothing new here. That's just the way it has always been. Joy and grief and sadness and sorrow and love for the doing. It's a celebration of life. And one of the ways you celebrate life is to come close to death. And in New Orleans, here in New Orleans, we put the fun in funeral.
In closing, words from eBay Motors. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. But it's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything, brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.